We continue our exploration of the Ice Age. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to another episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy made possible by you, the supporters of Core Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education. Excellence in pirate broadcasting coming to you, riding the carrier waves of the Miracle Channel, right across Canada via cable and satellite. We are also being carried down in central Michigan on GNS TV, all around the world on the Genesis Science Network, and of course on the internets, on Rumble and YouTube. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can find us at genesisweek.com or on my Rumble channel or on YouTube at wazulu.com. I'm your host Ian Juby, joined momentarily by my co-host Al Vachon. Today is Monday, March 11th, 2024. In just a moment, we are going to pick up where we left off in our previously recorded live stream, continuing our look at the Ice Age in response to viewer questions. Speaking of viewers, I wanted to take a moment to just thank you, all of you, for watching. Thank you for your support over these 11 years running now. Many of you have prayed for us, the show, and for me personally. Thank you. So many of you have supported us financially over the years. Thank you. This show has only stayed on the air because of your support and viewership. It's been a long journey from its humble beginnings, literally setting up a green screen wherever I was able, someone's office, a church basement, a friend's basement. In fact, the pilot shows were filmed in my buddy Derek's basement in Alberta while I was on the road in ministry. Thank you, Derek. And thank you to Pastor Dino out in Newfoundland, who first insisted that I put this show on the Miracle Channel. That launched it on TV, and within 2 years, it was literally airing on television internationally. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, for teaching me how to even create this show and for opening the doors and using this humble work, I being in the road, to reach untold numbers. With thanks to all of you, let's pick up where we left off last week at our previously recorded live stream, where we were discussing the Ice Age. So, coming back to the mammoths. They have no oil glands for their hair, so any water is going to cool them. They cannot, certainly can't thrive. One could argue that they couldn't survive in Arctic conditions. And also, where are they going to get their food? 250 kilograms of food per day. Where's all that food going to come from? Do you see any food in that picture? I don't see much. But here's the kicker. So in Siberia, where the mammoths number in the millions, it's not just mammoths we find. We also find horses, camels, rhinoceros, lion, leopards, the bear, tigers, reindeer, the giant beaver, musk sheep, musk ox, donkeys. Did I mention camels? Yes, I did. Camels. Even camels. What are camels doing up in Siberia?
I heard this thing and it just came to mind. I watched a program some time ago. They unearthed a fully formed woolly mammoth, flash frozen, so it had to be frozen extremely quickly and under extreme cold temperatures, while the contents of the stomach were still able to examine the contents, what it ate that day or whatever. It froze so quickly, it froze standing up.
Yes.
Now, what would cause that? And we, of course, biblically know the answer to that, right?
Well, I'm not sure. I wouldn't go so far as to say we know the answer. You've got speculations. You've got theories. Michael Ord has talked about that a lot. Walt Brown is another one who's talked about that a lot. But Michael Ord is basically suggested that at the onset of the Ice Age, basically these huge creatures just became snow fences, for lack of a better word. Because the question arises, you're absolutely correct, first of all, in everything you said. There was some more evidence involved that involves adult content, so I won't go into it on the show because this is going to go on TV. But pertaining to the physiology as well. And it was incredibly fast and indicated suffocation. And you are correct. The leaves in its mouth were so well preserved, they were able to identify the plants.
That's right.
So it's astonishingly rapid burial and freezing. And if you just take an elephant and stick it in your freezer, first of all, I'm impressed. That's a big freezer. The problem is you have to deep freeze it instantly, because if you take an elephant and stick it in your freezer, you can't freeze it fast enough. The stomach contents produce heat as they rot, just from digestion, which then spreads to rot from the inside out. Because it's generating heat, it's generating rot, and it's an ongoing cycle. Whereas it's freezing from the outside towards the inside, and the interior has already started to rot before the outside freezing can get to the inside. So it's a mystery as to why, what exactly happened there. Dr. Brown proposed that it was water from the hydroplate event that went up into, well, basically outer space, and dumped all its heat, became super cooled from outer space, and then when that came back down as precipitation in the form of ice and snow, it's super cold. So cryogenic temperatures. And Dr. Brown is proposing that that's what froze the woolly mammoths. And there's a lot of questions and debate about that. But the point being, it's not just the mammoths. We have an absurd variety of fauna, both animal and plant. In fact, it is so varied that, as Michael Ord put it, and Michael Ord was not the one to say this, this was actually an evolutionist he was quoting, and this evolutionist pointed out that the only similar diversity of mammals that we find today is on the Serengeti of East Africa. That's pretty astonishing. This is Siberia we're talking about here, okay? So we're going to come back to that. Remember this. It was so warm that the diversity of fauna and life was comparable to the Serengeti of East Africa today, the modern Serengeti. So let's take a quick look at the Greenland ice cores, because this comes up a lot with the ice ages. So the Greenland ice cores, and there's a bunch of references here you can look up for yourself. It is a fun topic, but this one in particular, from, again, Michael Ord, talking about the ice cores showing 100,000 years of ice history, ice growth history on Greenland. Obviously, for us Bible-believing creationists, a 6,000-year Earth, 6,000-year-old account of Earth's history in the Bible, this is a challenge. This is a problem. Or supposedly a problem. Let's examine that 100,000-year claim. So here we are, we're looking at Greenland and the ice sheets. And this one here, this is an ice thickness map. And the deepest point of ice, the thickest ice cap is right here, 3,205 meters thick. So way over 10,000 feet thick. That's how thick the ice is on Greenland. It's pretty astonishing, frankly. And you can see here, they've actually, what they did, the scientists have gone there over the decades, and they've drilled core samples into the ice. And they've just drilled down, they just drill with a big pipe, and they drill down, they pull a pipe out, and they shove out the ice core, the ice sample that they just did, and they just lay it all out, and it might go down for, well, 3 kilometers. And so they'll lay out this tube of this ice sample that's literally 3 kilometers long, and then they look at it and they can study the ice layers and the ice growth and everything, right? So here's several of the ice cores: Camp Century, NGRIP, GISP2, and GRIP. The Greenland over here. This was a former dew line site, the early warning system that they used to have during the Cold War. So this was one of the dew sites that was since abandoned in the early 90s. So they just kind of took it over, and they've done a number of ice cores there as well. So the claim is that this ice has grown over 100,000 years. Here's one guy with, you can see the ice core sample here. He's just looking at one of the ice core samples. And what we're looking at here, so this is the drill. It's just a hollow pipe, and they just spin it down into the ice, and it, of course, drills out an ice sample. And then they pull that out, they lay it on its side. So take this pipe, lay it on its side, shove the ice out the end. And now what you have is this ice core sample. And they look at all these layers in the ice, and they assume deep time. They're thinking evolutionarily thinking, and they're thinking thousands, millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, whatever. They assumed that all of these layers each indicate another year of ice deposition. So that was the assumptions they went on. And they were looking at things like volcanic ash that might be in some of the layers, for example. But here's the problem. Every year, there's 20 to 30 explosive volcanic eruptions. Every year. So literally in, even in 1,000 years, you're going to have, 20 to 30,000 volcanic eruptions. And now you want to go and try and identify which volcanic eruption did what on your alleged deep time scale. There's huge problems here with the assumptions just on that alone, right? So here's Greenland. And here's the ice core samples. I've only got 2 shown on this map. But notice I've drawn in, so here's the North Pole. And I've drawn in latitude lines with the Arctic Circle and latitude lines which line up with 2 of the major Greenland ice cores. So notice that at the time they're saying, so this is their time scale. I don't agree with these ages. I'm simply using the evolutionist time scale that they proposed. And they're claiming that at this time, the time that they date all these mammoths and camels and lions and bears and rhinoceros, all these other creatures are up in Siberia. And all these creatures are actually farther north than the Greenland ice cores. And yet, so while it was over here, while it was warm and comparable to the African Serengeti, it was apparently basically an ice age over here, farther south. So hopefully I'm making sense there. Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
Al?
I'm following.
Okay, cool. At least somebody's following. Okay. Maybe you can help out the others who are getting lost because I'm being confusing.
Yep.
And also, I want to point out real quick, while one could argue within the context of a global flood, like the only person who would argue that would be a creationist, obviously, but it is something worthy of consideration, is that animals during a worldwide flood can be floated. If they drown, mammals tend to bloat and float. Mm-hmm. And so the floodwaters can take them anywhere in the world. So, the camels, the lions, the rhinoceros, etc., Perhaps they floated there. All right, let's assume that for a second, and let's just write all that off. There's one thing that will not float, and that's fossil footprints from dinosaurs. So wherever those fossil footprints are is probably pretty close to where they were when they were made. So we have dinosaur tracks here in on the North Slope in Alaska. We've also got some down here on this island. Look at how far north this is. This is way north of both of the major Greenland ice cores. And yet here we find dinosaur fossil footprints.
Right.
Undoubtedly, the dinosaurs did not survive Arctic conditions very well at all. And there was this huge debate that erupted when all these fossil footprints were found, right? So the point I want to make here is, going by their ages, you have monumental, unsurpassable problems, because in other parts, using their time scale, other regions further north, they've got fauna that today would only be found on the African Serengeti. At the same time, when they claim these ice formations were around. However, what I want to point is to, so here's the Greenland ice cores, and down here, you'll notice I have a little airplane marked. And several people brought this up in the last recording. So here it is here, 1942. It's now known as the Lost Squadron. And it was a number of P-38 Lightning aircraft, as well as some B-17 bombers, were flying over to Europe in support of the war during World War II. And as they were flying over Greenland and Iceland, you got to remember, they're just using compasses, and that far north, they tend to be a little unreliable. And basically, bad weather moved in. So they got socked in at every airport. They had no place to land. They were running out of fuel. They found a break in the clouds, and they just ditched all the aircraft on the ice sheet in southern Greenland. So this is one of the photos that was taken by the U.S. Army after the ditching, and they just left the aircraft there. So this was 1942. So decades later, aircraft enthusiasts heard about this, and they're like, hey, we can go there, throw gas in the fuel tank, jack it up, make sure the landing gear and everything's running, start her up and fly it home. We have some vintage World War II aircraft in pristine condition. What more do you want? And so they spent years trying to find this lost squadron. The reason it was so difficult to find them was because the entire squadron had actually become buried under 250 to 300 feet of ice. So in 50 years, this is 1992, some reports said 250, others said 300. And by the way, I was just finding out this morning, they actually have located another one of the aircraft slightly farther away, and it's about 300 feet deep, right about where they predicted it would be. So they're going to try and go back and recover that one as well. But this one P-38 Lightning aircraft that they found. So you can see it was a pretty big deal. This was not a small job. They moved in and they had to melt tunnels in the ice, vertical boreholes. They had to melt down 250 to 300 feet. That's a long way down. And then they had to basically melt caverns, melt away the ice, get rid of all the water. They had to pump all the water out, and melt around the aircraft in order to dismantle the aircraft and take it out the hole piece by piece. And you can see a lot of this in a Mega Movers episode. I believe this was 1994.
Somewhere around 94.
I think you can get it on iTunes for like $2 or something.
Yeah,
so
and you know what? For anybody watching, if you haven't seen this, it's well worth the watch. It's fascinating how they can go out and do this sort of feat. Really incredible. Highly recommended.
Yeah, it was. This is an actual screen capture from the show. So you can see the borehole that they melted. And they had to come up with a whole process of exactly how to melt this. This takes a lot of energy. And they're in the middle of remote nowhere in Greenland and having to melt in the 90s, having to just pound out a bunch of energy to melt the ice to get down there. And also, David Hayes documented all this in his book, The Lost Squadron. This cover photo that he has here, this is the cavern that they've melted. So this is 300 feet below the surface of the ice is where they've taken this picture. And there's the P-38 aircraft, which they've now melted out this cavern around the aircraft. So he's got photos and all kinds of stuff in his book. And I highly recommend it. Fascinating story of how they recovered it. And that airplane right there is now flying. So Tino Groppi sent me this photo. Tino was at Oshkosh the one year, and he didn't even realize when he saw it the first day, he didn't even realize this was Glacier Girl. They named the aircraft, you can even see it there, painted on the aircraft, Glacier Girl. They named it Glacier Girl. It is flying, it is up and running. It's going to air conventions and air shows and flying demonstration flights and whatnot. So this was recovered, and do make sure you stop in at Tino's website, genesisevidence.org. And so thank you, Tino, for the photo. So let's take a look at this now. So here's where the Lost Squadron was found. So it was exactly 50 years between when the aircraft were abandoned and when they were found and excavated. So in 50 years, 91 meters of ice had accumulated on top of the aircraft. 91 meters. That's a lot of ice. So you break it down, that's 1.82 meters per year. Pretty simple math. So up here, the deepest part of the Greenland ice sheet, 3,205 meters, which is insanely thick. But even that insane thickness at 1.282 meters per year can accumulate in a measly 1,761 years. This is based on facts that we know, not speculation that those layers they saw in the ice, which we now know, as you were mentioning before the show, why don't you tell everybody, Al, what you know, because you were right on the money with what you were saying about the ice layers.
Going to this one documentary about ice cores, how they had a scientist, his name escapes me, but the scientist who studies ice cores for a living came out and he looked at them. They brought him in to examine them. And he said, these are not annual rings in the ice cores or annual layers. They're not even seasonal layers. They're temperature change layers. So every time the temperature would dip below whatever temperature, it would create a layer. And then when it would warm up, the sun or whatever, it would create another layer. They were temperature changes, not seasonal or annual, which right there debunks that long 100,000 year, 200,000 year hypothesis.
Yes. Yep. And there was a bunch of variations, a bunch of reasons for the variations there.
Mm-hmm. For those of you who caught the live stream with Joseph Jordan and Guy Malone and were intrigued by the topic of aliens, UFOs, and how they fit within the biblical and creation science context, Ian put together a mini-series just on that topic. This 4-part special report contains a deep dive into the shockingly common UFO phenomenon and even more shocking phenomenon of alleged alien abductions. You will walk through what both the Bible and scientists have to say about aliens, and surprisingly, the theologians and even atheistic scientists agree on what these alleged aliens are. This miniseries is available on a 2-disc set in either standard definition DVD or full high-definition Blu-ray, and is on sale now. You can order your hard copies today on the store at eandjuby.org.
Woohoo! Mail for me?
With a chance, I've got M&J Bray writes, a quick question with probably not a quick answer, and I apologize if this was covered earlier, but what is the most likely cause of the Ice Age during the flood as best as can be hypothesized?
Okay. Short answer. We did answer at the beginning, but it was actually after the flood. And it was because of all the mostly tectonic upheaval that happened during the flood that produced tremendous amounts of heat, underwater volcanoes that literally flooded the continents with lava. There was so much heat generated. All this heat was dumped into the oceans, what is now the oceans. And so warmer oceans produces massive precipitation from the oceans onto the continents. And a lot of that precipitation falls as snow and ice, and that accumulates. There's the start of the Ice Age, and the Ice Age ended when the oceans finally cooled down and got rid of all their heat, and all the massive precipitation basically slowed down to, what we now deem normal. Right. So that's the short answer.
Thank you to those who joined us for this live recording of this show, and please follow us on social media to find out when the next live stream is so you can jump in and participate in the discussion. Now, we'll bid you a good night and leave you with those words of hope and warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." So everyone have a wonderful evening, and God bless. You can send your comments, questions, hate mail, and letter bombs to us in a number of ways. You can email comments at genesisweek.com, or you can tweet at GenesisWeek. Or leave a comment on CORE's Facebook page at CORE Ottawa. Or leave a comment on the appropriate show available on either the Rumble channel, rumble.com/user/IanJuby, or on the YouTube channel, which you can easily find by going to wazulu.com. That's Ian. And that'll take you straight to the YouTube channel. But just remember, these shows are now recorded live, so you'll want to search out the show under the Live tab. We need your support to keep this program on the air, so please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation via PayPal online at eandjuby.org/donations, or you can mail a check written out to CORE, Canada North, Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K 2P4. And thank you for your support.